This is the first week of Advent. Advent is a common celebration among Christian faith traditions, and it is celebrated on the 4 Sundays before Christmas. I grew up celebrating Christmas not only at church on Sundays, but every Saturday or Sunday evening with our family. Sometimes Saturdays, because our Sundays are really busy. And this was a time for us of connection and deepening our spiritual connection with the reason for the season. And last year I did an update of that family ritual that we did all those years ago, and so there's copies of that out there next to the Advent booklets. So grab one. You can use it with your family, you can use it with your friends, or you can even use it as an individual practice of contemplation and deepening. So please use it, share it. Now, the first week of Advent is traditionally called Hope, though it is sort of morphed into faith, at least in unity circles. And so we light our first candle. Maybe. It's very windy over here, apparently. First candle for hope and faith. And this week is about the beginning of our journey to Christmas. That's what Advent is this journey to Christmas. And in unity churches, we generally think of Christmas as the celebration of the birth of the Christ energy within each of us. So what does that mean? Because it means a lot of different things. So I'm going to tell you what I think it means, and then you can think whatever you want about it. So the second unity principle is that there is a divine spark, also called the Christ, within each of us. And our purpose is to express more and more of that Christ, of our Christ self. We do this through prayer practice and deepening our spiritual awareness and education and things like that. And so Christmas is our time to remember the truth of our divineness and express more of it. And hopefully, not only do we remember it now, but we keep it going. And every year, this is like a renewal and moving it up a notch, and every year we just keep moving it up a notch. Hopefully that's the idea, right? So we are rebirthing, remembering the truth of the Christ that's being born in us. And so this Advent season is our reminder of our journey to that. And it works, remembering who we really are, because all this time of year we see people in the giving spirit, taking care of those less fortunate. And that's expressing our Christ or our God self, right? And we may travel far and wide to share our gifts, not only our gifts of presence as well as presents. We'll travel far and wide to share those with those we love. But no matter how far you go in our 21st century world, I bet you it'll be nothing compared to the journey of the Magi or the wise men. Because, they traveled across deserts on camels. And you're probably going to go down to the airport. I'm just saying. Just remember that. If you have any hiccups in your travel adventures, at least you're not driving a camel on a camel train for, months and months and months. We don't actually know a lot about the wise men. The idea that there were 3 is probably derived from the number of gifts, but the specific number of persons is not actually noted. It's more of a tradition that there was 3. There's not really any particular. And while tradition says they arrived 12 days after the birth of Jesus, hence the 12 days of Christmas. That's what Epiphany is, in case you missed that. Epiphany is the day that the wise men supposedly arrived. Late for the party, but whatever. There's actually also no record of the timeline. That's also one of those traditions that we've just sort of made up over time. And more modern scholars who aren't so attached to tradition say that it could have happened anywhere from 40 days after to 2 years. It's a pretty big window. And they have like real reasons for that, but we're not going to go into all that. That's for another day. So, I know I'm pushing the boundaries of traditional, how you think the Christmas story all worked out. But if you read it in the different books, it's all different anyway. So, and the truth is there's a lot more we don't know about what happened to Bethlehem 2,000 years ago than we do know about what happened. Most of it's a mystery. However, what we can learn from and be inspired from in the story is stronger, I think, than any historical facts. It's just interesting to think, okay, well, what could that mean? Instead of being like, well, there had to be 3. The Magi are often considered scholars or astronomers who saw stars in a formation that meant to them that something important was happening. And so they set out, following their faith, that this was what they needed to do. It's not exactly known where they came from, but it would have been a very long and expensive journey. And I've heard some of your stories, and I know that I'm not the only one who's taken a journey to do something that they knew was theirs to do, even if it seemed kind of crazy, like following some stars across the desert for months and months and months. Might have sounded a little nuts to these people's friends, right? So that faith, that belief in ourselves and our inner wisdom to take the leap, that's something we can learn from that story of the Magi. And to help remind us to take that journey of faith when we know our journey, we have a journey to take. Whether it's a physical journey or a spiritual journey or an emotional journey. So what about the gifts? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Frankincense, which I didn't know how to spell until yesterday. They are, it's a hard word. And I probably won't remember by next Christmas, so I'll probably say the same thing. They were, so what's about those? Because gold we know about still, but the other ones are kind of not something we know about in our time a lot. They were actually very common gifts to royalty at the time. So some scholars say, well, that was a usual and customary gift, just like bringing flowers and wine to the hostess of a party you're attending. Could be just that. Could be. Gold, well, of course, was valuable then, as it is now. Frankincense was used as a perfume or incense, and myrrh was used for anointing. So very useful things to do. Others speculate that these were a little more specific to Jesus' role. Gold symbolizing kingship. Frankincense representing a priestly role, because they would burn the incense, of course, in the temple. And myrrh being a foreshadowing of his death and embalming, which I think is funny because everybody dies at some point, right? So, comments aside. And then Charles Fillmore, who was a co-founder of Unity, has another symbolic interpretation, which I think can bring it home for us. So what does gold represents? Our spiritual gifts, the riches of spirit. And that gold that the wise men brought, this is his quote, the gold that the wise men brought to the Christ child was consciousness of the omnipresent richness of substance. To follow Jesus in the demonstration of prosperity, we must charge our mind with wise and rich ideas. So the gold represents the richness that is everywhere. Yes, those of you who took the prosperity class know what I'm talking about. Yes, the substance that is everywhere. And so that rich goldness represents that there's never-ending abundance available. We charge our mind with wise and rich ideas. And then about frankincense, Charles Fillmore says that it represents in man the transmutation of the material consciousness to the spiritual. So when you think frankincense is an incense, right? And so this is representing our transformation from material consciousness, like, to a more spiritual way of seeing and understanding the world, which is why we show up and have spiritual community and read spiritual books and come to church, right? We want to have a more spiritual consciousness. So frankincense represents that. And then the myrrh, according to Charles Fillmore, represents the eternity of spirit, an emblem of the resurrection and ointment of love. And so it reminds us that life is eternal. And that spirit is eternal, regardless of the bodies. And then he says, he has another thing that he says about all of them together. He said, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the wise men brought when Jesus was born are symbolical of the inner resources open to the Christ child. When we give and receive gifts, we can remember that they represent the spiritual gifts that are within us and are ready for us to awaken and use. So, giving and receiving gifts is spiritual practice. It's an excellent thing, right? And it reminds us that we are the gift, and to be in the gift, and that there's unlimited abundance. There's all sorts of great things. Love it. You know, gifts, yeah. But when you hear all those gifts, when you hear those gifts, remember that frankincense reminds us that we're spiritual beings. That myrrh, that we're eternal in that way. The gold of unlimited substance. Remember that about gold all the time, because we see gold all the time. And then there's the matter of King Herod. He really had some problems. You know, somebody has to play the bad guy in the story, I suppose. So, as you might remember from the story, the wise men went to King Herod and said, hey, we saw this star, something big is happening in your kingdom. We want to know where this new king was born so we can go to see him. This is the New Revised Rachel version of the story. And Herod was like, oh, well, I don't know about that. But when you find out, you come back and let me know. I want to go check it out. And, but the wise men had a dream saying that they shouldn't do that they should not go back to Herod once they found Jesus. And that was a good thing. So they snuck out the back door and went a different way. It's okay, there's lots of deserts out there, so apparently they figured out a way back. And this is a good reminder for us to believe our inner wisdom. You know, both of you were wearing yellow and you're talking about that's the color for wisdom. So well done, ladies. You didn't know. And so this story reminds us also to trust that inner wisdom. And when we know that we need to do this instead of that, we should do that. And there's a part about they saw it in a dream. You know, they heard in a dream that they should do. And I say, you are the ultimate decider of what it means. If you take some time in the silence and say, okay, what does this dream mean, or what does this idea or this vision mean to me? It may mean one thing to you, and if somebody else had the same dream, it may mean to tell something totally different, completely reliant on their own life experiences. But to go within and trust that inner wisdom to help you figure it out. So, from the story of the wise men or the magi, however many of them there were, we remember to take that journey of faith, to trust our inner wisdom, to remember that there's abundance everywhere, and that we are spiritual beings, and that we're aiming in for that direction. So as we venture out on this journey of Christmas, we have actually the longest point from the first week Sunday of Advent to Christmas this year, because Christmas is on a Sunday, right? So we actually have the longest amount of time to celebrate Advent, which is awesome. More time to get ready, to prepare the way. to remember that we're rebirthing that Christ Spirit, that God Spirit within us. And that we continue to get to walk in faith like the wise men. Sometimes we don't see our journey, we just keep following the star, knowing that it's there. We hone and listen to our inner wisdom. And we become more aware of the gifts that we have and that we're here to express. And that is the journey to Christmas.